welcome back to another show. Today I'm going to be talking about another Peter Watkins film. It's called La Commune. Now, La Commune is a hard film to get hold of. There's no commercial releases in the UK. As far as I know, you have to buy import from America on DVD, or you can see it now on YouTube. So there are options for YouTube, and that's probably the easiest way to find it. Just go to YouTube and find La Commune, and you'll probably have a good chance to see it. It is almost 6 hours long, so it's quite an epic. It was shot by Peter Watkins, who is a terrific director. He did Privilege, he's done Punishment Park, War Games, Culloden. Just amazing amount of work. He does some great stuff. Edward Monk. So he's top level director. And this was his final film, like a 6 hour version of the events of the Paris Commune in 1871, where basically, due to social inequities, where people were getting worked to death and they were getting treated horribly, they rebelled and created their own little commune in Paris. They exiled the government to Versailles, and the government had to form its army to come back in and actually take Paris again. The actual film is about complications of society, though. It's not really. Peter Watkins, even though he's got a political bias and political view, he does not make simplistic films. He's willing to look at the downside of his own beliefs so that you're going to have a complicated view of humanity through his films. He's not going to whitewash anything. And that's what's great about this film. He really is very serious about the circumstances of why the event happened and why the Socialist Uprising happened and what were the consequences and what was the downsides. And basically, I mean, the big thing about this is it's an overreaction by every side. Every side has a tribal reaction to what needs to be done, and they don't think it through, which leads to tragedy because people just do not think things through, and that's the problem in the film. Basically, the film's always shown as people. You have to go by their point of view. They have to go by what they say the way the world works, rather than looking at the world as a complicated set of lots of people trying to make a living, trying to survive. So everyone's got a simplistic view of how the world should work for them. Everyone has their own selfish views of how things should work, how their ideal view of the world would work. So there's no simplicity to it. There's nothing that says, oh, there's an easy way out of any of these problems. It's like, no, it's complicated and there is no obvious solution except for trying to not go over the top in your reactions to things. That's the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway of this film is don't overreact, whatever side you're on. Do not overreact, it's going to cause havoc. It's going to cause violence. Right. So the instigating incident, basically this is like 70 years after the French Revolution. The French Revolution has come and gone. It had its great rise to get rid of the crown who were oppressing the people. The ups and downs since then. The Great Revolution fell apart, and basically there's been minor little revolutions since then in France. But you've still got a powerful society of the rich people, of the capitalists who run France and who are a colonial force who are going to go out there and rule over other areas. Because France was colonial. When France was fighting for America with the British for a long time before the American Revolution. They were fighting for a very long time. And they were fighting the British or fighting the Germans. During the beginning of this film, they're just finishing a war with Germany. So they're always fighting, they've always got the things going on, like we wanted to have power. So the rich are still viewing society as someone that serves them. So any of the poor that come up has to join the army, basically. And there's lots of churches that run the education system. So if you're trying an education, you're getting an education of the church telling you what the reality of the world is, which is biased towards the rich people, the people who pay the church And everyone controls this. Basically, the rich means, if you're rich, it means you have an education, you can read, you can control the poor by paying, or like telling them which they have in wages. You can control all of that quite simply by having an education. Because that's why when you're a kid, you're always told, get an education to way out of poverty. Because it's a way to actually, or it was then at least. Nowadays, you can have an education and still not have any money. Because everyone has an education of some sorts. But then, especially, if you could read and write and get an education, you know how to run a business, you could do really well, and everyone else would be poor nearby you, and you could control anything you wanted. And the higher you went up, the more people you could control. And the system was rigged so that no one got an education that was worth a damn. So people would have to find a trade pretty quickly. A lot of these people would not be able to read or write. And if you want to make a living when you're young, a lot of the time what you do is just join the army and get told what to do for years. So there wasn't much choice either. If you're a woman in society, you have to be a seamstress or a school teacher or something. A lot of seamstresses, to make a living, had to become prostitutes on the side as well, just to survive, just to feed their families. And basically they were bringing their own children into the same system, even though they didn't want to. It was just the way the world was. It was just in, and they didn't have a way out to say, look, this is how we can educate our families the way out of this hell. No, you couldn't do that. It was just like, no, they're in the same system as you. They're your replacement, basically. There's no upward mobility here. It's just like, if you're in a poor area, you're going to stay poor. If you're in a rich area, as long as you're doing anything stupid, you'll be fine. And your existence relies on how you were born. There was no opportunity for a lot of people. There was no equality of opportunity there. It just wasn't happening. And that's the downside of capitalism. Capitalism protects its own. If once you're rich and you're a rich society, they will do anything to protect their own so they don't go into become a poor society. So they educate their young to respect God or respect the way society works, to work hard in a certain area to keep the stronghold against the rest of the people so that they're working for you. That's just the way it works. There's no way around it. That's what's happening for you. And if you're poor, you're poor. So that's kind of capitalist system that was working at that time. That's why you had the rise of people like Karl Marx who were saying this society is messed up. There's nothing for the poor, so they should rise up and become the masters of the trade because they want to do the work. That's what was the thing that spawned it. But of course, the Marx system's simplistic too, because it creates a thing of, everyone's pure who's poor, and the rich are all scumbags. And in fact, it's a system. It's not really. I mean, yeah, there's scummy rich people, there's scummy poor people too. It's a system of wherever your luck lands, that's where you are. So at this point, people are rebelling. They've been rebelling for a long time. They've been grumbling for a long time. They're really getting sick of getting paid the low wages and having their employers saying, look, that's all we can afford because that's all the money I'm getting from the clients. And they don't know if it's true or not. They think maybe they've been ripped off because the people coming in who are the employers always have the good clothes. So it's like, what's going on here? I should say that this film's done in a very Brechtian way. There's only one main set, which is a square, which gets dressed for different places, and there's a bunch of small rooms that are redressed as well to represent the poor areas or to represent the areas where government is held. So it just shows you how interchangeable what the function of different areas can be within a revolution and within a society. It's always changing. And it's also showing you, so it also means you don't have to be pretty with the lighting or anything, you just have to say, like, this is a new function, this is a new function. And the whole idea is once the revolution, like before the revolution, people were poor in this area, so it looks grungy. And then after the revolution, people are still poor, so it's always grungy. There's no elevation up, ever. which is the pessimistic side of the film, but it's true. So the film goes into the idea of what it means to actually raise yourself in society in this highly capitalistic system that is a system. You know, it's not even that personal. It's just like it's a system that creates the rich and the poor, and the rich want to keep rich, and the rich have formed a society and have set of beliefs around the way to protect themselves, and so do the poor. That's basically it. And what happens when the poor actually get so oppressed that they have to rise up? I mean, that's the big thing with capitalism is it never knows when to say no. That's enough. People need to earn a living. People need to actually be better off. They don't. They should not be struggling to get food or pay the rent or anything. It needs to be fairer. Capitalism doesn't care about that stuff. It's like, what have you done for me lately? It just doesn't care. They may make, if they're shamed into things, they may make little public donations or something to charities or something like that to say, oh, we do care, honest. And if there's any like social event that's going on, they will support it just to say, look, we're not heartless. But they don't care, really. I mean, that's why you need a left wing, a healthy left wing, is to fight the downside of capitalism, which is capitalism can be good in lots of ways. It can create new opportunity, it can create a lot of development. A lot of development within society has come through capitalism, through attainment, through ambition to create better things for us. Of course, the people who create these better things want to get paid for it and actually have a good life. So that's the good side of capitalism. The bad side is when everyone gets greedy and you're not going to give anyone else a share and things like that, and that's where you have to fight back. That's why you need the left to be healthy and to be strong. So you need a good balance between the two to actually have a healthy society. You know, you need like a sense of attainment, a sense of there is a reward if you work hard and if you've got some good ambitions, but you also need to give some back to society. But if you're in a system that's very highly capitalistic and very predatory, you're not going to do that. And it's going to be ingrained in the society not to do that, ultimately, which is the problem in the French society of that period. So they're still colonialistic, they're still very much fighting people, there's very much, you better know your place to the poor, and the poor finally fight back because they're sick of basically starving to death, and they're sick of education being useless and church-led and corrupt to their view. But then again, Watkins is enough of a smart, intelligent person to actually know that some of the people actually in these churches trying to educate these people actually care. They're not. I mean, while the system can be criticised, some of the people inside the system are trying to do their best. The people you see, the nuns you see, are trying to teach these children, and they're just teaching them what they're allowed to teach them. But so they are trying to teach them some skills so they can survive, even though it's not the ideal for what they need to actually be like really productive members of society. It's just like you're in a society that doesn't grow. I mean, that's another thing with capitalism is it oppresses a lot of people, and the people who perhaps can grow from it are the people who are already at the top. So the people who have lots of good ideas, who are already quite from wealthy families, they've got the ability to do that. And if you're poor, it's much harder. I mean, you can get your idea out there and get paid for it and get money for it, but it's much harder. It's just life. It's just the way it goes. But you see this as a frustration with the people enough so that there's some skirmishes in Paris, and ultimately an area, the 11th district, actually gets taken over by a community who are saying we want to control our own destiny. We're sick of this, which spreads quickly throughout Paris. So the government has to go to Versailles. Basically, this thing spreads. So there's a lot of frustrations, a lot of people saying, this is how you should be doing it. You should be community-led. People should have a power. Everyone should have a vote. So that's stuff that's going to go through the mainstream society later, beginning the next century, and create votes for women and votes for anybody can vote. It's going to come eventually, but it's going to be a lot of teething pains because that's the way human beings work. So they have a lot of ideas that which are going to come to pass, but because they use violence to get it, because they've been knocked back so much, been knocked down so much because the society in place is so corrupt and so uncaving. It's focused on wars. It's focused on how can we get the most money from the colonies? How can we get the most money from these wars? How can we create new trade so that we get rich and sod the poor? The poor can just wash their clothes and stuff and be bakers and things like that. We don't care. They can give minimum wage. We don't care. So the people get fed up and they rebel, and ultimately the film becomes about what happens to rebellion because it's a 6 hour film. The rebellion's like the first hour, and the rest of it is okay. What is a communist society? Especially when this one was a failed communist society, which is what really happens in most communist societies. Ultimately, it's one of those things. A socialist society that we haven't actually worked out how to make it work because the ideals are kind of vague. Ultimately, there's a sense of okay, everyone has a vote, but everyone have a vote usually means that everything gets watered down and argued about, and it's okay if a community of people talking, and it's a small group. There's a whole bunch of people, no decisions ever made. So you need to create leaders, and those leaders are in basically it's good and bad. Because basically, if you're one of the leaders of this thing, you've got a lot of power, but you've also got a lot of people breathing down your neck saying, "Oh, you're not listening to us." So you're damned, ultimately. And even the more further you go up, ultimately, the more it goes on, the more things happen. You have to defend the community from people try to take it back over. You have to rely on people who can be brutal to knock down to defend the community, so they rise to the top, and the people who are probably a lot more decent and would listen get chucked to the side. So it starts being okay, how do you control this massive community? Oh, you have representatives from each area. Okay, it becomes a representative like a government, but they don't make enough decisions. So you need to create a smaller group, a subcommittee, like Soviets, and then it becomes an even smaller subcommittee ultimately as crises happen and people disagree. And you have this thing during the war where bases try to defend themselves, and one person saying one thing from the subcommittee, and the people who are the soldiers do not agree with that, so they disobey orders and don't do it. So they have to come down harder and harder on the soldiers, and that causes problems. And the subcommittees, people fall away left, right, and centre. The press starts to criticise them, so we don't want to. But everyone of people who criticise them, you're not part of the good press, so you're shut down. Because we need good soldiers who are following the communist thread, and at the same time, all the different people are saying, okay, well, we've now got rid of the oppressors. How do you make a living now? Oh, well, the government's not giving us any money. They're giving you food stamps. Then it's like, oh, the government contracts for these things are actually lower than you had under capitalism. Or that's what the person who is the owner of the business is saying. We don't know if we can trust them or not. And you're going back and forth, you're seeing the people who are the owners of the companies saying, no, that's what we got, that's all we got, I'm trying to do my best here. But even then, you're not quite sure, can you trust them or not out of the line? And the whole thing's shot as if it's like a news crew shooting this thing. They'll be the wood 100 years later. So you have different journalists. So in the picture here you can see two people with microphones, even though it never happened at that time. So you have one who's more critical and ends up quitting, and another one, the woman who's for the cause always, and she's very uncritical of what's going on, and she does not think it through. And that happens a lot, and you actually see a lot of people who are not given. You have people who think a lot, and there's other ones who aren't, who are just going by the emotion of the situation. And that's leading to a lot of arguments, and you actually start to see that people cannot agree on anything. People are so complicated that you're never going to get a massive agreement. You need democracy is the best we've managed so far, and most of the time, as you probably know, and from your own life, that most of the time the leaders in a democracy you think are a complete idiots, a total shambles, and a disgrace. And that's the best we've got, because if you look at something like this in communism, it just shows you it's much more open to abuse, because people can use ideology as a weapon for how they think this should be or that should be. And if you're not one of the faithful, you can get oppressed pretty quick. Even if you were loyal before, if you suddenly disagree, you're gone. And it becomes the dark side of communism, the dark side of a community, because the structure has been worked out, tied to who human beings actually are. Human beings are complicated, annoying, and irritating, and a utopian idea of a communist society doesn't work with human beings. It's very frustrating, because you would think, oh, everyone being equal, that would be a good thing, but it's not a good thing, because it takes away. It makes it means what you're doing in the community, all the things always have is harassed, so no one's allowed to stand out and actually be individualistic and create new things, which a healthy society needs. So it's gone from one thing where no one's caring enough about people to caring too much and becomes this fog, and then if you don't care the right way, you become oppressed and you're as a person, you're shut out. And this film is just all about the human complications of this. Like the idea of you take over the education system and start teaching people how to think. Yeah, they learn how to think, but they almost become brainwashed to the idea of the communists, which is the community above all else, so they almost become like non-individuals. In a different way from the non-individual you get under capitalism, where you've been told, follow the church. You want a different kind of non-individual, because you're a different tribe now. And it just shows you the difference of tribes, you change the name, you change ideals, but a lot of people are followers. I mean, it's just the way it is. Just life. You have some people who are very much leaders, the other ones who don't want to do all that stuff. They don't want to live their lives. They do not want to start a revolution. If they're in a revolution, they have to just try and survive within it. But they're not passionate, because a lot of people just look at the ideals of other people and just say, well, you haven't thought this through properly. Then there's other ones who just don't think things through anyway. There's a whole range of people. And to actually have an idealistic view of anything, it creates a problem, because you're going to run into contradictions that don't work. And the big problem with communism is it just basically tries to smash through contradictions and say that doesn't work, you're a traitor to the ideal. And that's what you see here. But you also see there's also wonderful ironies, like because this coming on the last 3 or 4 months, the top people don't have a chance to become that corrupted by it. It's like they keep on getting told of so much power and they're not listening, and they're shutting off their discussions because they kind of have to just try and get things done. And they're trying to make sure the society's working, and they've got only so much resources. If they're fighting a war, protected people, they're trying to get food in. They're actually doing so much because most of it is just boring stuff. They have to try and get to keep people living. But they've also got the other side is they've got the power, but from the top it almost feels like everyone's demanding so much from them that they don't really feel any power whatsoever. They just feel they're getting barred by everybody. Which, if you've ever run anything, you'll know that's the case. If you've ever run anything with lots of people below you, everyone's got an opinion of what you're doing wrong. And if you're supposedly in power, it doesn't feel like you're in power most of the time. It feels like you're trying to corral a bunch of maniacs. Especially in a community. It really does feel that way a lot of the time. And that's what the film gets really right. And the film was done really well because Peter Watkins had a situation. He gave the actors all the research material. These were all amateur actors. And did a passion for it. So they all read up and all got their parts right and all got everything to a T, so they knew exactly what the points of view of the characters were. And then they improvised. And they shot the film in 13, 14 days. So it all feels very brutal, very immediate. But also, there's a distance because as the film goes on, they start to comment the fact that they're actors in a film, but this is not reality, it's a film. And the film keeps on bringing that back, it's a film, but it's not reality. Reality is much worse than this. This is a dramatisation, and it is them offering an interpretation of what happened more than that's what happened. But as by the way they filmed it, by creating a community of actors, as a community with different opinions, which suddenly shows off what the contradictions are within a communistic culture. So as a bit of complications of humanity, and how you have to actually take that into account. You can't just say, "Oh, we're all a community," when we're not. We are tribal. We have those things in us. So you have to try and work out, oh, what does it do for us then? What do we actually have to do with these drives? Is there a way to have a society that's much fairer with these drives? Because so far, whenever we do it, we tend to mess it up and create something like Venezuela or communist Russia. We become utter hellholes, utterly destroy everything. Because, I mean, this society already after like 3 months was already going pretty wayward, even though they did the best of ideals. And imagine what happens in something like Russia where they take over and to way to defend themselves, they put people like Stalin in charge to protect them, and then he becomes a dictator because he's a twisted view of what socialism as it is, and it's like, I'm doing this for your own good, and he will utterly destroy anybody who acts against him. That's 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 the idealism that seems to happen a lot in communism. It's like Castro or something like, I'm doing this for the good. It's very patriarchal. It's very much like, I'm doing this for the good of you. I mean, a woman could do the same thing. It could be matriarchal quite easily do. I mean, it's just human nature. Human nature is greedy. And even if you say, oh, I'm doing this for the people, your own greed and corruption is there. So you kind of need to always be in the. I think a healthy society is, at the moment, it's democracy. It's the best thing we've got, but it's not perfect anyway. But it's better than unchecked capitalism or unchecked socialism, because both of those sides, they just go towards the ideal and they ignore all the weird complications and the weird dualities and all the weird inconsistencies that are there. I mean, the problem with democracy is that all that stuff's ignored as well, because we seem to jump between one to the next. Like, what's the best way to do it? But at least with democracy, it gets checked because you have elections, so that if you go too far in one direction, people get sick of it and they elect the other party. So there are checks and balances with democracy, because you actually just see with any party, if they've been in for too long in any democracy, eventually people get sick of them and vote them out because they do become corrupt and do have really bad ideas. And if you know it check you and say, no, that's bad, it becomes a problem. So this is all this in isolation, this idea of what's the problem with humanity when dealing with how to organise and structure your society. I mean, this is only one take in the film. You can do lots of takes in this film because the film is so complicated and so long, and it's got great characters. Even though they're amateurs, everyone is of a good quality of acting, and you start to see all these individuals. Even though ultimately you don't get names, but you get faces and you get ideas of who they all are, and the idea of the tragedies of all these people who, whether you try and stay off the side and not get involved, you're going to get involved in some way. You're going to get caught a traitor and shot for being a traitor, or you become a zealot. You'll basically get them getting shot by the government when they finally come in, because the government finally did come into Paris, take over, and shot a lot of these communists, and they put a lot of them in jail, sent a lot of them to colonies to actually work like hard labour for years, when in fact they were rebelling against something that was unjust, which was the conditions they were forced to live in because capitalism had gone too far another way. And as the problem is, there was no real democracy in place. The democracy was like men of a certain age get a vote, really. Basically, men get a vote, and we will do everything to protect the society. That was an old way of doing things before the votes in the early part of the 20th century became for everybody. Then it evened up a little bit better. But before that, it was protecting the rich, basically, was the big thing. Or if you were a poor person, there's only so many of you could vote for the parties that supported your needs, and there wasn't enough of you, really. So it's about systems and about how systems affect human beings, how human beings affect systems, and how complicated it is to run anything, and how everything is. I mean, revolutions need plans for what happens after the revolution, and that's where a lot of revolutions fail because they don't have plans. They've just got ideas of what they know is wrong with society, and they don't have a clue why, what you can actually do to improve society. That's why nowadays we've got these riots going on. It's dangerous because they don't have a plan for what happens afterwards, and you need to have a plan for that. It's important, and this film shows you why it's important. This film should be shown, so you can see on YouTube, but it should be shown everywhere. It's really important nowadays. Like, you need to plan for your future. You need to plan as a society for your future. You can't let people being so poor that are going to fight back against you, and then just see all the scumbags or something. No, they're there for a reason. They're angry for a reason. You have to find out what the reason is and try and find out how to deal with it. And is it valid, or do they have bad information or whatever? Because even though revolutions have a certain pattern, the reasons for them do change. It's not just the same. Like, a revolution now would be different from a revolution then. Like, for a start, with much more human rights now than we did then, so it's going to be slightly different. But there's always like a reason why it's happening. There's always a reason for things that haven't been taken care of, or seem to have been taken care of badly, that you have to really look into. So I mean, this is a film about complexity of humanity, and it's basically a call for sanity, really, to think things through, to talk things through, and to weed out the bad ideas and try and look at what's solid, and also look at where patterns of behaviour can go wayward in any society. So it's a very complicated film. I'm not sure if I've done it justice with this half-hour video, but hopefully this is a primer for you to go see the film and then make your own mind up about it. Because it is wonderful. It's a great film. Highly recommended. Just go watch it. Right, that's me for now. This went on a lot longer than I thought it was going to, but that's me. Okay, right, bye for now.